All right, so main topic for today is storytelling versus world building. Okay, this is a discussion that is happening in many creative spaces right now, and we polled the community about it and got some feedback from them. So the direction that I want to take this overall conversation is defining storytelling and world building, comparing them, and then basically I'll figure out where to take us from there. Okay, so let's.
And then I'll rein in your crap. And
Exactly.
we'll figure out what we're doing here with our lives.
It's like with my children, I can only give them about 2 steps at a time to follow, otherwise nothing will get done properly. So you have now received your 2 steps. Let's start with defining.
That's really funny, actually. I was asking the kids to clean up their room the other day.
Yes.
And I told Clara 2 specific things to clean up, and she got very mad at me. She said, give me one thing at a time. Okay.
Jeez Louise.
It's true.
Cannot wait for that.
Just the Kelly dolls. Never mind the Legos.
So let's start with defining storytelling, why don't we? Okay, so what is the definition of storytelling? Let's start with Tom.
So the non-answer to this question, I think, is that storytelling basically eludes definition. Like I've read a whole ton of books by writers, and all of them have a very different definition of what storytelling is.
Okay.
And I think most of the time it's because they're all trying to find a definition of what good storytelling is. I think a story at its most basic form is literally just a series of related events. That doesn't mean that's a good story, but that, the plant grew is a story, and here's 5 screenshots of the plant growing.
Is that your story?
That I'm starting small.
Sorry. We've rejected it. It's not going to get published.
You just said Siri.
Siri's like to help.
Oh, that's funny. Shh. Now, I think a good story, or a real story, if we want to take it there, it's about change or a tragic lack of change. Like, what is the effect of that series of events on a person or a circumstance or a group of people?
Something transformative. Yeah.
Do you have an answer before I give a couple of these from the community?
Sure. Yeah. So my definition of storytelling would be setting up some dominoes and then imagining all the different cool ways that they could fall down, and then using whatever medium you've chosen to walk another person through those series of cool domino fallings.
I like that metaphor. Here's a couple answers from the community about what it was. So Paul W. said storytelling is about action, even if the action is inaction. Very similar to what you said. Matthew W. said storytelling is a journey. John N. storytelling is the main narrative. Brian S. stories are the narrative. Eric H. storytelling is more guiding the reader down an unknown path. Okay, so that's the side of storytelling from everybody in the community. So a narrative, a journey, guiding them down that path.
Aaron Sorkin talks about intention and obstacle, which I think is like an age-old concept, but I'm looking at the stage, man.
Yes.
But it's...
Speaking my language.
They're characters have an intention. The story is them trying to get past the things that are preventing them from completing whatever this intention is. And does that change them? How does it change them? Do they get to fulfill what they're trying to do? Do they fulfill something different?
Okay, so now I'm going to flip it a little bit and ask about world building. So let's kind of define what world building is. Mark, you get to start this one. What is world building? Go.
So like storytelling, world building has a broad, diverse range of ways that it can be viewed. I think a lot of people default to the setting that the story lives in. I tend to think that world building can be much larger than that. And I think that a world can have many settings in it in which there are many stories. And the way that those settings are connected can be its own story. So the world building can be its own story. And how that relates to its setting is a whole other thing. But the setting and the environment is very important in creating a stage where I think people can relate to the story, which I think is really important for storytelling. If people aren't relating and you're not bringing something new and interesting, showing the audience something that they've never seen before, I think then there's really no excitement, there's no drive, and people don't really feel engaged. So the setting, the world, I think is really important, but building the world is in some ways telling a story. And that's the way I look at it, and I think some people disagree with that.
Yeah, to modulate my
Yeah, I do.
to modulate
Very much disagree.
to modulate my analogy to work with what you just said. World building is setting up the dominoes, imagining that they have already fallen, and now here is where we're at. And what are all the implications of all of those events that I just imagined happening, or different rules or facts about this world? And I think that world building, more than storytelling, is just seeing the web of interactions and taking every mindful decision that you make and taking it to its limits of how could this possibly affect every other thing that I've said.
One thing I think is important that you said is the rules and facts.
I think, world building to me is just the facts of the place or the facts of the environment. So you have the, the setting, like the actual environment, the landscape, the, whatever actual nature element of the place, and also the culture of whatever people group exists in this story. It's just the facts with no narrative whatsoever, and so world building, an example we used in a conversation a while back was, a piece of world building is to say, so there's a world and it's like Earth, except dogs can talk and dogs only speak Farsi.
Right.
That's just facts. But now they imply a whole bunch of story.
So what happens because of that?
It's also a variable, right? So if we were shooting this podcast, in a sauna or in a meat locker, we'd be having a different
life goals. These things now we were going on site.
My first thought, as soon as you started listing off places, I'm like, a donut shop. Yes, a donut shop. We could do this in a donut shop.
We have donuts in a meat locker.
Is there cheese in the donut shop?
No, that's a different podcast.
Oh, okay.
Or it's the donut shop that Lacey will open.
Jared, what is Lacey's view on cheese and meals?
Lacey's view on cheese and meals is that all food are vessels to transport cheese to her mouth.
So imagine a world in which all things are a vessel to transport cheese into my mouth. That's the world I've built.
So all things in the world exist to put cheese in you.
Yes.
I have some stories already.
Let's talk about monster trucks.
Some of the same people who talked about storytelling, when they defined world building, defined it as world building is an environment. World building enriches the narrative by giving it structure. World building are the facts. And one of my favorite things that somebody said is, it's Paul W. The art of active world building, no matter what the scale, begs for the creation of story. The human mind will create stories whenever a space-time is presented. So all you have to do is present a space-time, and a story just begs to be revealed.
We do a lot of this in the company, obviously. We do a lot of world building. And even when I did research for this, about how Google is going to present me with ideas about what world building and storytelling are, it is almost always that the story is the gem and the environment is the package that it's in, or the world is the package that it's in. And I disagree. I think that they are in relationship. I think that your story can affect the environment or the world that it's in, and vice versa.
Yeah.
And I think they have to be co-developed as if they are they're like two versions of story in my mind, and maybe I'm crazy.
Yeah, I think story has this incredible potential to impact people, but your ability to create a cool world is what causes a lot of these really impactful properties and
like
to
magnetism.
exist. Like, Harry Potter, Star Wars, all these things. The world is so cool that I could imagine how I would exist within it. And that's what keeps me coming back, not specifically the choices and events that happen to Harry Potter specifically.
But I think what you're saying, though, makes the argument that what matters is story. Like, we are storytelling creatures. It's one of the first things we did when we developed consciousness.
Crawled out
or
of the
whatever.
mud.
Like, immediately storytelling. And I think, the example you just gave was you making your own stories based on an environment, but it's still the story that you're connecting to. You know, if I said
Interesting.
there is a wizarding school, like you immediately start telling a story in your head about why that matters. But the fact that there is a wizarding school doesn't mean a dang thing. It's the stories that we tell or that are shared with us that resonate with us. It's the story that matters. And world building is a foundation on which stories can be built. But world building in and of itself is kind of meaningless. And what's interesting is I think you can have world building without story. Your mind tries really quickly to apply story to it, but you can theoretically have
Sure.
world building without story. I don't think you can have story without world building unless you do some really abstract weirdness.
I've had a thought about this. I think that you absolutely can divorce them. Specifically in regards to story. So a perfect example: if I come up with a story about an event that did not happen to Lewis and Clark, but I do not change any aspects of the universe, just like this mudslide I say happened but did not happen, that is a story that I have not needed any world building to create. But at a certain point, once this story has gone on long enough and the events in the story impact like further on events in the story and it becomes self-referential, all of a sudden the story is now like an alternate universe, an alternate world that has its own implications.
But that story still had a pre-existing world already.
Yeah, there are still human beings named Lewis and Clark.
And
Right, but that
and
doesn't
a trail
require
they went down.
world building on your part.
Oh, I see what
I'm
you're
saying that
Not building.
the act of
You don't
storytelling
have to
without
actually
world building.
build it. I see. Okay, so a world was built, but you can still storytell off of that because world building had been done before.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So why are we so drawn to tell stories? Why are we storytellers?
Relation. If you can relate to something, it's almost like a role play. When you watch a movie, you're watching how humans respond in different situations, and you're relating that to your life and what you might do or what you have done or what you've seen other people do. And there's something interconnected about us that brings us together through story that I think is one of the big differentiators between story and world. Because world is the frame, right? I just think that there's a little bit more nuance to how they're connected. And I think that proper or really, maybe not proper, but really insightful world building will allow the world to change its story as the story changes. And you could argue that that's just story and it's not world building, but I think as you go through life and you have events occur and the things that we do and say impact everything else and they impact our environment and they impact each other, the environment changes, right? So the world changes. Is that part of the world building or is that part of the story? And I think the answer is both.
It is definitely both.
What I like, let's think about Vindication as an example, right? The way that Vindication's world was built really is prime for the interactivity of story and world. When you talk about the idea that magic is awakening on this island, well, then there's an awakening already happening within the world, and the world is the environment, but the story is going to keep going on and interacting with the environment. And I think that is something people really enjoy to take part in.
Why are we storytelling creatures? I loved that question. What are your thoughts, Jared?
My answer on that is that storytelling is how we relate. To take a Thornton Wilder quote that was about the stage, he said that, theater is the quickest way for one human to show another human what it means to be a human. And that applied to all different mediums, and each medium just has like a different speed at which it can show you what it means to be human. And that when I tell a story, that is not only me like processing the actual story, but it is also allowing this other person to feel what I'm feeling in the story. Like a perfect example. Okay, so Vsauce, really awesome YouTuber, did a video where he spent 3 days by himself inside this like perfectly white room. And the thing that he missed the whole time was talking through everything that he was experiencing. And he had this takeaway that you only experience something halfway while you're experiencing it. And that the other half of experiencing something is when you share it and you're able to have that moment of like going over it with someone else. And I think that story is just like a fictional version of that, is us relating about like through things that didn't actually happen.
Do you think that consciousness begs for to understand and to be understood? To understand and to be understood. It's like the reason communication exists, right? The reason we started grunting at each other. You know, can you understand what I'm pointing at?
You're saying that we're supposed to have progressed past that stage. I think that you're right. I think that life is one giant process of processing. And, you know, engaging with story is the act of not only processing things that you have experienced and felt and working through them, but also, you know, by osmosis, experiencing things that other people have gone through to learn more about what it is to be human, about your own experience. It's really interesting. There's like, if you hook someone's brain up to, you know, sensors and stuff, if you do a science thing at them, and
I'm glad that's what we're hooking their brain up.
just hook them up to science.
It could have been anything.
You know, yeah. And then they read a book or they watch a movie or whatever. The chemicals in their brain behave in a way that is you are experiencing that story as you read it as if you were experiencing those events. Now, obviously not to the same degree, but you experience as a participant the story that you're taking in. Your brain's not just shut down. Like you know, and that's why when you watch or read really traumatic things, like that does have a minor trauma impact on you because you just, to a degree, experience those things as a participant. And depending on what you've gone through in your life, that might be a very necessary and helpful and cathartic way to move through and process and in a safe way re-experience and think about and reframe things that have happened or that you're curious about or whatever. But we do experience stories as a participant, which is a very fascinating concept.
Yeah, that's why people jump in scary movies. That's why they cry in sad movies. I mean, there's an emotional, mental, psychological engagement that we relate to each other and events. And I think that's very significant. And I think that's why there's an entertainment part of that. And there's a part of it that's just innately we want to learn and we want to grow and we want to experience things outside of our normal existence, and we reach for.
That's why the Fast and Furious movies are so popular.
Yeah. No world building there, but enough story has gone on that it can self-reference and be a world unto itself.
It's the same world.
You know, Mark, when we were talking about just creativity earlier and the enemies to creativity, and some of the things that you said within there, we're just talking about how you think about how it will make people feel. This is the same concept we're going over here then, is that the stories that we're telling and the reason we're telling story at all is to translate feeling from one, do you feel this? I feel this. When this happens, I feel this. Do you feel this? Mm-hmm. When cheese gets put in my mouth, I feel great. That's all.
Rule 3.
Describe your experience with cheese. Great.
Describe the delivery method. Yes. I agree with that. I think as people relate to those types of things, something triggers inside of them, right? And I have cheese stuck in my head, and I can't get it out. I'm thinking about Havarti.
It's a good cheese.
I think when you're writing story or telling story, it's very important to allow the viewer to make that translation and not try to dictate that. I think you can lead someone in a direction and then set them loose. But like Alfred Hitchcock, he always said he never shows the monster in his movie because the monster is always bigger in your mind. And I think that is a powerful tenet to keep in mind when you're storytelling. I think you can also address that through world building. And again, maybe there's a larger discussion there, but I think, and it probably has to do with the obligation of the creator or the artist, but the expectation of the user should always miss the mark from what you actually deliver. Like nobody should ever be able to predict what you're doing. I think if that happens, you're probably not as effective a storyteller as you hope you would be.
Well, because people won't genuinely feel something if they know it's coming. Don't you think? Don't you think feeling is a reaction to experience, and you're not really experiencing something if you've already conscripted it, right? If it's too scripted.
And it's not satisfying to learn something that you already knew, right? You already know what you know. And so what we're interested in is in growth. And when you have a twist in a movie that you didn't see coming, it's much more satisfying than being able to predict the end of the movie, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's not satisfying at all. So, I don't know.
I agree with all that. I think there's room for both, though, because I think sometimes the reasons that we enjoy stories is because we get to experience the things that are happening, and sometimes we're just hungry to experience a certain thing. Like, you might be watching such and such a movie for the 10th time because you just want to be reminded that there is love and warmth in the world, because your life has none of that right now, and this movie lets you experience that. And even though you know it's coming. And now, not to disagree with anything that you just said, but I think that there is room for both. There's different types of stories, different approaches to story for different goals.
You're right. You changed my mind on that.
And, some storytelling is designed specifically with the impact of people who are not the specific storyteller in mind. Perfect example I'm thinking are tons of open world and free roam video games or Dungeons and Dragons, where it is set up, and the draw as a consumer of this medium is to be an active participant in the story, to be a mover and shaker. And talking about what Mark said about the stuff that we leave in and stuff that we leave out, it's very interesting in situations, especially like D&D, where it's a very collaborative experience, that sometimes the details that you accidentally leave out, or that you leave out during your description of a situation, all of a sudden in every single player, they all now have this knowledge about the world and what's going on, and they have all come to this conclusion, even though it wasn't necessarily exactly what you thought of, and allowing them to run with that instead of trying to say, no, you guys have misunderstood what I was trying to say. I was thinking this other equally cool thing, but because I thought it, I want to make sure that you guys hear it, even though that thing is just as cool, if not cooler.
And what happens is everybody has a different thing in their head, right? When I say cat, what color is yours, right? I use this example
It's
a lot.
orange.
Yours is orange, mine's purple with yellow
No, it's
spots.
not.
It is.
Your cat can't change every time.
I hate cats and I hate purple.
Wow.
Unsubscribe. What's fun about D&D, and we've talked about Skyrim in this arena before, is the idea that sometimes, and we take this approach to our game design, the trick is to give people agency to tell the story that they need to experience right now. And, so in D&D, here is a world. Skyrim is that way. Here's this amazing, giant, robust thing. Go do whatever you want. Go encounter
it's
and
not
do.
robust. If you haven't played Skyrim before, it's not robust. Continue.
Fair enough.
Famous for the bugs.
You
Continue.
stand corrected.
I understand. Full of bugs. Robust.
Robust.
But it's the goal is still storytelling, but you've given people a platform to find the story that they specifically need, as opposed to prescribing a story for them. And sometimes the prescribed story is just right, but other times you need something a little different. You need to go on a journey of discovery. And that's what D&D is a lot of the time, is you don't even know what frickin' story you need right now, but you just engage, and slowly that story just develops based on the way you're behaving, and you end up experiencing exactly what you need to experience, or something that surprises you in a way that, something a little more guided wouldn't necessarily deliver every time.
So what makes a story really compelling?
Depth.
Depth, I think, is good.
Again, I think what we would have to define compelling as, what are you trying to accomplish with that story? I mean, I think as a storytelling maxim, it's something is most compelling when when characters have very clearly defined objectives and things in the way of those objectives, and you can see the arc of their development.
Yes, that's depth.
But
The story, the thing to me that makes a story compelling is what happens in here and in here while that's being presented. it's not even what the author did. It's not what the creator did, the director did, the actor did. It's what I'm doing, right? It's what I bring to it.
You mean as the viewer or reader or whatever?
I hate that movie. I love that movie, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's because of what they brought to it. And we've talked a little bit about this before too. And that is really interesting for an author or a creator to think about, who is this for, right? And you don't know the answer to that, because you might design it for this group of people or this tribe and find that they don't care for it, and these other people that came out of the woodwork would be like, this is us, this is our thing, right? That's really interesting to me. That's the way I see it. Maybe it's just a Mark thing, but when I mean,
that's what makes the experience compelling, right? Is that what?
Yeah, but see, what that turns into is, I absolutely adored that story. And then people ask why, and then you start to extrapolate all the things that went on in here and in here. And some of that is credited to the author or the creator, because they maybe did that by design, but it would be different for me than it would for Jared, right? Jared had this experience, and it's different than mine. Maybe we both loved it, but for completely different reasons.
Yeah, and I think defining that word compelling as like the allure, or how this particular piece of entertainment or media not appeals, but how it aligns with the things that get me going, that get my mind racing, that I get excited about, and the things that I love are compelling to me.
Well, what I want to know is, was this conversation compelling to anyone else? As we're coming to close and wrap up this conversation, I'm just curious from the people who are listening, how much of this resonated with you? Are we right? How far off are we? Are humans just telling stories for generations to try to understand and be understood? What have we missed in this conversation?
I feel like every time we finish one of these conversations, that I always have this sense that someone who's been listening could just walk into the room and be like, "Listen,
here's
the actual truth that you guys are all dancing around like buffoons."
So if you have the actual truth
Please
that we've
distill
all
the
been,
actual truth
been
for us.
dancing around.
Well, that was me at home, and now I'm here on the couch. So.
Save a buffoon.
So sincerely, if this conversation resonated with you and you have something to add to it, we would love to hear it. We'll have a post about this in the Outpost community, and we'd love to continue the discussion overall. Share it with a friend if you have any friends. Otherwise, you can just come back to us again next time. We'll be here.
I love that has become a theme of our show.
Share it with a friend.
Do you have a friend? Oh, makes me happy.
But we thank you so much for your time listening with us and laughing at us. And I am grateful for you three, of course, for the time that you spent with us.
And Havarti.
And for Cheese.
If you have been a listener of the show, we are now producing it on video, and portions of it will be available on our YouTube channel.
So check it out.
Yes.
Orange Nebula.
Thank you so much for your time, everyone. Stay inspired. Keep telling stories. Build those worlds.
Stay in school.
That too.
We will talk to you soon. Bye. Goodbye.
Let's do stay in school.
Boing.